How long have you had a partnership with the Working Poor Families Project?
We've been involved, I think, for about 5 years now. So, and it's been invaluable. The data that we receive every year from the Working Poor Families Project is something that we pour through extensively. Again, like Maryland, we're one of those states where if you rank us, we tend to come out on top in many areas, very highly educated, high incomes, but we have this huge inequality with low-skilled working adults and those who are at the top of the income ladder. And when you look at the data, you see, for example, that Massachusetts is one of the worst states in its investment in public higher education. This is the system where low-skill, low-wage adults are going to turn to upgrade their skills, and we have a abysmal investment in this system. And so by using the data that we've been able to track over time and show that it actually has been a diminishing investment in our state, we've been able to make a strong case and get a lot of attention for the work that we're doing.
Brandon, when the organization was first formed, what did you envision the goal to be? What did you think you would accomplish, or what did you think that the Working Poor Families Project could accomplish in different states?
That's a great question, because as we first started off, we thought that the key thing that we really wanted to do was kind of raise the resource level and create additional funds, if you will, to support low-income workers going back to college, going into a training fund, things of that nature. And as we've evolved, and it really was, I mean, this was when we started in 2003, we only started with 5 states, and we've added states since that time to get to our 25. But we realize over time now that some real key byproducts of the work we do is building the capacity, or helping these groups develop the capacity to work on these issues on an ongoing basis, to be able to do it year after year, because one of the things that's become clear is that you don't achieve the type of policy changes that both Jason and Ruthie are talking about in 1 year. It's building the foundation for that change, building the alliances within the state, getting the data out there. A whole variety of things are involved in that policy process, if you will. The other thing as we've moved forward is recognizing that there's a breadth of policy issues that all kind of come together. You don't think of them necessarily as being that related, but when Jason talks about the family leave, we start talking about the issues of a family and their ability to go back to school, how family leave influences work, while it influences the ability to participate in training, a whole variety of things. And all these kind of come together, and I think one of the things that's helped the groups do as they make their case is put this broader picture in front of state policy leaders and say, there are a number of things that we really need to address in order to help our low-income families succeed economically and advance up the ladder.
Did you envision that this network of communication that you were creating would be so beneficial to the different states and help them model their own proposed legislation?
Well, you know, as I said, we started off with 5. It wasn't until we got to about 15 in our 3rd year that we started seeing that really come to play. And we've kind of built on that. We have, they mentioned before, we have our annual meetings, but we've taken that a step further, and now we do something called state policy academies. So we'll take a specific subject like adult education and spend a day and a half with all of the groups working and really digging in deep to those issues so that they understand it. So when Jason comes back to talk about adult education in his state, he's as much as an expert on that issue as the people in the state who run the program. And I think we'd all agree, we've all come to learn, you need to have that level of expertise in order to really engage in the policy debate and be seen as a credible force. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of they can speak to it better than I can, but I think one of the things we see is that their credibility to work on these issues has really grown over time. And so they're often, I think, one of the first groups that are contacted when an issue comes up in a state.
Jason, what sort of a reaction do you get in Baltimore when you deal with legislators and you are addressing Working Poor Families Project? What kind of a response does that
Well, I think that they have a lot of respect for the work we do because it's so often based on data. It's not just do it because it's a nice thing to do. It's do it because it makes our state stronger. It makes our workforce stronger. It makes our employers stronger. And I think that's really an angle that the Working Poor Families Project takes. And just to pick up on another idea that Brandon was just talking about in terms of the expertise that's needed, so frequently when you're pursuing a policy initiative and you're seeking, for example, to measure outcomes, which is another very important measure for the Working Poor Families Project. At times you will have a policymaker who's a little bit reluctant. It's too hard, it's impossible, there's a specific barriers to why we can't do it. And being able to work with our neighbors to say, well, you know, Florida had that problem, but Florida solved it in this way. I mean, often policymakers don't have the benefit of being part of the Working Poor Families Project where they get to hear from other states. And so you can help them go to their state counterparts in a different state as well to solve these problems.
Right.
Ruthie, have you had a time where you could serve up the numbers and say, here's the data, this is...
Absolutely. I mean, we've met with commissioners of higher education and we've talked about the challenges of community college students, and they, you know, say, we just don't know what to do. And I'll say, well, in fact, there's been some great reports. I'm happy to share them with you, with, you know, best practices around the country, and they really turn to us and rely on us to provide them with the best practices and the successes of other states.
It's also really important to give them context. For example, going back to adult education, when you're trying to increase the investment, obviously you can't get unlimited resources in adult education. But in Maryland, using the data from the Working Poor Families Project, we were able to say, it's not just that it's not enough money because we say it's not enough money. Here are the rankings of what the states are providing in adult education. Maryland ranks 46th in the nation. And a state like Maryland doesn't want to rank 46th in the nation. So we were able, with using that data and some other reasons as to why to increase the investment, Maryland took it, and they have doubled their investment in adult education.
Okay. You have had a lot of successes in your individual states. What advice could you give to others about some of your success stories? What has worked?
Well, I mean, like I said, we're 8 years old, so one, let me just tout the success for a second. I mean, we're very proud of the work that Ruthie and Jason have both done in their states, but when you look collectively in our new report that we just issued, we kind of talked about the collective results of our groups over the past 8 years. During that time, the 25 organizations have generated or saved approximately $2.5 billion in state resources that can benefit low-income working families. So we're quite pleased with that, but it's certainly through the work of the state partners that have helped to make that happen. So as I look at what I think are their successes and how that has come about, I guess there are a couple things that I would identify that we've kind of begun to touch on today already. One is grounding their interest in an issue in the data. We do provide these folks more data than they ever want to see. We have what we call 130 indicators in our framework of indicators, and we provide that annually to them that talks about the conditions of low-income working families in their state and also does an analysis of where their state policies are relative to other states. So as Jason and Ruthie have both mentioned, we'll rank and say that Maryland doesn't do so well in supporting their adult education. And so that's information that they can then use. And I think one of the key aspects of that is that they're coming into the policy debates with objective, credible information that they bring, not just kind of yelling at the top of their lungs saying we need to do something about that. So I think that's number one. Number two is I think the analysis, the expertise that they put behind an issue. When they take on an issue, there's a whole range of issues that we ask them to think about. But when they decide to focus on an issue, like a training program, like resources to go to the community college, we ask them to become experts in that area so that when they do sit down at the table, they can talk equally with the policy peers within that state. And I think that's a very critical thing that you have to do. And then the third thing I think is really just determining what your strategy is for trying to educate policymakers on the changes that they need to think about making. And part of that comes down to communication.